Hello and welcome to the Bottom Line Me podcast. I'm your host, Ann Allard. Today we're going to be talking about the power of education, not just formal training or formal education, but the kind of education that fuels growth and confidence. Joining me today is Karen Arthur. Karen is quite passionate about how continuous learning can elevate your performance and anything you do to improve or enhance your life. So, Karen, welcome to the Bottom Line Me podcast.
Well, thank you, Ann. I'm thrilled to be here,
I'm
sitting
thrilled to have
across from you.
It's super. Well, I know you may have been on early on in our podcast, but for our audience that may not know you or may not be familiar with you, can you just take a minute or two to tell them a little bit about yourself, what you do at Old Republic Title?
Sure, I'd love to. I have been with Old Republic Title going on my 12th year.
Congratulations.
And I love the company. I love the culture. I love everything about this company. But I am really, for lack of a better word, a point person for all things education when it comes to our region. And it's a funny story. I started as a rep with Old Republic, and then I found my passion in education, and so it became really where I focused and spent a lot of time. So I feel like I've really found my passion with education, and we've got a lot of, I shouldn't say obstacles, but we've got obstacles coming up. We've got people retiring, and we've got things that are happening that I think education is so important.
Yeah.
So,
well, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I love your passion. So let's start with the big picture. Now, we both, I think, would agree that our industry is constantly evolving and changing, whether it's market conditions or expectations that clients have. Education seems to be now more important than ever. Would you agree?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why do you think that's so? Why do you think it's such a powerful tool for professionals to use today or to take advantage of today?
Well, I mean, for one thing, we really are in a changing market.
Yep.
Not any two deals are the same. And so it's a very, it's always a changing market. But education as a whole is really crucial for not only me growing in my career, but also to provide exceptional service and, be navigating, complex transactions that, one thing about this industry is that no closing is all, every closing's different. And so we all know that, no transaction's the same. The other thing with education, and I think that this is what I get really passionate about, is that it builds credibility and it builds trust with your clients. So when you're continually expanding your expertise, you become not only reliable, but you're also credible.
Yeah. Mm.
And I think that that's essential when you're in an industry like ours, where your goal is to build these long-term clients, these relationships, if you will. It really gives you the competitive edge. Yeah, truly, education does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense to me, and I'm sure to many of our listeners as well. So another thought that came to me when I was thinking about this is there's a lot of resources available, but there's still areas that we all struggle with in education and training. What are some of the most common gaps that you've seen or that you've experienced?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, we have, it's a complex industry. It really is. It's very complex. We're dealing with legal, we're dealing with financial, we're dealing with, even customer service skills, that sort of thing. So it's very complex, and it's difficult sometimes for professionals to grasp all those aspects, if you will. And so, we deal with high stress. I used to joke around that, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I didn't have a closing, and then at 4:30 I wasn't going to be home for 2 hours because I have a closing.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where the stress can be a little high. When you have high stress, then you're subject to burnout, which that's that's just another thing. We're also dealing in our industry with the talent shortage, if you will. We've got people coming into the industry who don't even know what title insurance is or what we do, and so we're dealing with that. And then we have employees training employees, and so I say that because what happens in our industry is we hire somebody maybe without much experience, and then we have the person that's sitting next to them train them. And while maybe in theory that sounds good, we found that training the current employee training the new employee, they may not have been trained properly. And so now they're going to pass on bad habits to this new hire, which then will cause them to be concerned or fearful, or they can't do the job, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so education, again, I keep saying it, but it's very important, and it's very important that we take the time to train our people, train them the right way, give them the right resources.
Yeah. Well, I think that leads perfectly into the next question. But before that, it's so interesting that you talk about, the shortage and the next generation. And, you may have heard me say this before, but nobody grew up saying, I think I'd like to be a title professional. It wasn't anything that anybody ever even heard of. So, yeah, I think that's true. People come into the industry and they really don't know what they're getting involved in, unless they came from it. Most of the time it's your family was involved in it.
Generational.
Something like that. Mm-hmm. But so I think that's really interesting. But let's go back to, how do you train people? There's lots of different ways. It has really changed an awful lot. I was thinking in the last 10 years, but probably in the last 10 days even, we've gone from, traditional in-person always, where you went into a hotel, sat there for the afternoon and learned whatever was on the agenda, to today, all these digital quick platforms where you can get bite-sized training or just quick tips. So, how do you see the role of education evolving and changing, and what's working and what isn't,
Well, if you think about it, I mean, definitely e-learning is where it's at right now. I mean, that's the learning management systems, the LMS systems, the e-learning platforms, that's where it is. But I think it's important to bring up, TikTok. TikTok has changed, or YouTube too. Both of those platforms have really changed the way people learn. And so back when I started, if I had a question, well, I hate to admit this, but I didn't even have the internet, so.
Well, I feel your pain.
But if I had a question, you looked it up, or you asked a mentor or some, nowadays, if people want to learn something, they YouTube it.
Yeah.
It's very quick. It's very short videos that they learn by, and that's great. It's great, and that's where it's evolving. So there's, I think, more that I like to share, because I think that we need all the platforms. Every platform works together for the greater good. And so, while those are great, and that's kind of where we're heading, it's not to say that those are the best, or it's not to say that, that people walk away with a knowledge base,
Well, and I think sometimes it could be, what is your preferred learning style too? I mean, I think your point is well taken, that all of these platforms or delivery methods make sense, but some are going to fall flat when you're in an audience of people like me, and others are going to fall flat when they're in an audience of people like you, because we have perhaps different learning styles. So do you think there's any one that's more effective than the other?
You know, that's a really good question. I, just like you said, I personally like what we call a blended learning. That's, online, kind of self-paced. It's also in person. There's something about being in the same room with the instructor. I think that you are more apt to get more out of it. I know that in our business, when we get busy, we tend to maybe put on a video, but we're not listening. We're kind of only half listening.
Yeah.
And so I think that blended learning allows you to have that in-person instruction as well as the webinar based.
Right.
Micro learning is another big one where it's very short. Education pieces, maybe 3 to 7 minutes, which is great. No. That's more of like what I was talking about with the how the younger generation is using YouTube, that sort of thing. The thing that we have to work through on that is, in our industry, in order to be licensed, most states require you have a certain number of hours, continuing education hours. So it's learning, can we accredit micro learning if we have proof that they've taken all 10 modules in a 30-day span? We don't, this is all new. Yeah. So we're working through some of those. And right now we're not seeing, obviously, where micro learning would allow you to get your CE hours, but at the same time, we're looking into that, the industry as a whole.
Yeah. Or it makes sense that it's likely in some form or other, it will come to pass. But all right, I'm going to shift a little bit to, the impact side of this. Sometimes the best way to understand the impact of education is from a real story. You got any story that you can share with us about how education made a difference for someone?
I think that
you're smiling.
I know. I think that, and I'm a big proponent of certifications. Our industry does not have, a college degree. There's, you don't go to college and go, hey,
to become a title professional.
Yes. So most states, and even American Land Title Association, they have certifications that we can get. And I think that the certifications are so important. It's not only for your benefit, but it's also for your clients that you're working with. And it's showing them that you've invested in you're invested in your career, you're invested in learning, you're invested to give them the best possible service you can by learning. And having that certification, I think, is really important. And I think it's something that people should be really proud of. I will tell you that I got my certification. My state offers certification, and I got my certification. And even being in the business as long as I have been, you're still kind of wondering, am I going to get that certification? And of course, back then we had to wait for the mail to come. They didn't notify you, quickly. It was right. Like, so you'd be like, okay, it's 31 days. I haven't heard. But I think that it just gives you that sense of credibility, and that shines through to your clients, so.
That's a great answer. I love it. I would have never, I was thinking of a story, but I think that's a great answer. Thank you. Yeah. We got to talk a little bit about culture. I think creating a culture of learning, it doesn't happen by accident. It takes some intention and probably good leadership, or somebody that's embracing these types of things. So what advice would you give anybody that's listening today who wants to foster bringing continuing education or learning into their organization? What kind of steps would you suggest they take?
I think most importantly to start is you definitely have to have management buy-in. I think management has to be behind it. I think they have to let them know that, hey, this is for all of us, that sort of thing. So I think one is the management buy-in, but I think that this business, like I said, it's so complex and you're dealing with so many different people and it's emotional. I talk about it a lot with clients, but it's very emotional. You don't know why somebody's selling their house or why somebody is moving. It could be that they're downsizing or it could be that they're retiring. There's so many emotions within, that. And so I think that it's very important for people to understand that we are going to take time to train you and educate you and grow in this business or grow with this company. I think that it's very important that people understand that they're a part of it and that we're going to invest in you. And I've worked with several different agents that they've done just that. And they've literally said, for these 2 hours on this third Wednesday of the month, I want you to walk away from your desk and we are going to do training. And they set out, a plan for that. Mm-hmm. And it lets everybody know that this is important to management, but it's also important to, their professional development. Right. I think it sends all the right, messages for learning and education. So I love when people invest in their employees, and it keeps them from you leaving. Think of the cost when somebody leaves. You've done training, or it's a cost that somebody leaves because they're unhappy, or they don't feel acknowledged, or they don't feel like they been trained properly. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, you've convinced me. I think, not that you had to really, because I've always felt that training and education is a worthwhile investment. But I really appreciate the way you kind of summed that up for us. So I want to, shift back for just a minute to technology, because it really, I think, not only the way we conduct transactions, but it's really, changed everything. And education is part of that everything. And I know you talked a little bit about things like TikTok and, mini, what did you call them? Micro learning, mm-hmm. Right? Which I'm obviously not in tune to. But, so how is this really changing the way that people get to know about our industry? Do you think there's any connection there?
Well, I think, it goes back to what you said in the very beginning, and I think that people don't really understand what we do. Yeah. They really don't, and so I think that you've got people that are probably like Googling, what is title insurance, right? And how does it work? So I think you've got that side of it, but I think that it's more our, how do I say this, but more our industry. I don't want to, you might be able to go on, TikTok and Google that. I'm not sure you're going to get the right,
there
answer.
You go.
So that,
yeah.
I don't want you doing that. I think the education does come from our industry, our attorneys, our underwriters, our escrow officers. More of like a mentorship, really. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's seeking out those, experts in the field, and not just relying on what you see on TikTok or read when you Google it, I guess. Yeah. So, interesting. So, let's talk about the future of just for a little. I can't believe it, but I'm even asking this question. But it really is important that we all stay ahead of the curve on this. And when I think back, I can't even imagine some of this. I couldn't have imagined some of the ways we deliver information or even have conversations with people. But it is what it is. Any specific emerging trends in real estate education that you think our audience should be at least, thinking about or staying connected to or watching for so that they can prepare if there is any next big change? And if there isn't, that's okay too.
I think that, one thing about our industry is that we have regulatory issues. We've got federal, there's so much that we have to think about.
Yeah.
And staying up to date with those regulatory issues with our state or changes with our state or the federal changes. But I think that people have to understand how they learn the best.
Yeah.
And think about that and take that into consideration. One of the things when we were talking about technology, but we have the e-learning and we have the micro learning. Another kind of a trend that's happening right now is I hope I can say this right, but gamification.
Oh, right.
Yes. People love, that's one way they like to learn, is maybe more of a challenge or a game or that sort of thing. So I think knowing where you're learning, what your learning style is important. And I think sharing that with educators is important, When I go out and talk with people and interview people of what they're looking for educational wise, those are things I ask,
right.
How do you learn? What works best for you?
Right. Finding out what's This nothing's smooth about this industry. I mean, the simplest transaction can turn into the most difficult one, and there's a lot of ups and downs here. So I think education, from what you're saying, really can serve as a tool to help us to navigate those challenges, or it helps us to prepare for shifts in the market or even to manage the potential for burnout. So is there anything you'd like to add to that? I know we touched on it a little bit already, but just wondering if there's any other thoughts you had on that, because I think what your point is such a good one.
Well, I think that when you think about career advancement, promotions, leadership roles, I think that all that is part of that.
Yeah.
I really do. I think that we talked about it before, but when you get into this business, a lot of people love it. They love the challenge of it. They love the complexity of it. They love, everything about the job. And so because of that, the education, they grow and, they grow into that. So,
yeah. I've often said, you come into this business and you either get bit by the bug or you go running for the door very quickly.
It doesn't take long to figure out.
Then this isn't for me, or this is where I want to be.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's bring it home with our bottom line, and maybe with something a little actionable. If you could offer our audience one piece of advice about they're continuing to grow and learn through education, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to share with you my light bulb moment. And I
love light bulb moments.
I know, and I love sharing this story. So what happens is in our business is that we kind of stay behind the desk. An escrow officer, an escrow assistant, a man, we're all somewhat behind the desk. What I found, though, is that when you're building a client base, what I found is that those clients want to see what you know, show me what you know. Mm-hmm. And there's no better way to do that than becoming an expert in something that you can go out and share with your clients. And so for me, it was the new closing disclosure. And so when the new closing disclosure came out, we went out and educated our agents and their clients. And so I became an expert in the closing disclosure. And it took a lot of time and energy to learn, what it was and to become that expert. But once that happens, it was amazing that I could be out educating someone, and afterwards people would come up to me and they were like, "Oh my gosh, can I get your card? I'd love for you to, close my transactions." All of a sudden I realized that they looked at me like the expert, and everybody wants to do business with the expert.
Sure.
So my actionable item here that I want you to take away is I would love for people to pick one topic in our business. It could be, I'm trying to think, it could be, 1099 reporting, or it could be the closing disclosure. And then go out and visit with your clients and say, "Hey, I'd love to come and talk at your business meeting on Tuesday. I'd like to introduce myself, and I've got a few things I'd like to discuss on, new industry, things new in the industry," or what have you. You become that expert, and like I said, everybody wants to work with the expert. So you've got that leg up on getting in front of people. And it's I know getting in front of people is hard, but it does get easier. It really does. So go out and practice.
Well, exactly. Well, I love that. That's a great actionable item or challenge to our audience. So Karen, thanks so much for spending some time with me. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. It's so apparent that you're passionate and you love what you do. Thanks again.
Thanks
Really,
so much for having me.
Thank
I enjoyed it. It's always good to see you.
Well, always great to see you too.
Thanks so much.
And to our audience, as always, we enjoy having you with us. So until next time, we hope you'll all continue to learn, grow, and prosper. Thank you.